The winds howled over Winterfell like ghosts mourning before the battle even began. Snow fell in thick sheets, blotting out the moonlight, and every torch sputtered in the wind. Soldiers lined the ramparts, their eyes fixed on the dark horizon. The dead were coming, and Bran Stark, the three-eyed raven, sat quietly beneath the ancient weirwood tree, eyes milky white, his mind far away. But this time, he didn't return. Theon Greyjoy stood guard near Bran, his eyes darting nervously across the godswood. The trees rustled unnaturally, like something was breathing through them. The crackling of branches in the night was not just wind. It was footsteps. The dead had found them. Screams echoed across the courtyard. The trenches had failed. The whites poured over the walls like a flood, overwhelming everything in their path. Arya sprinted through the halls, face bloodied, eyes wide. She was trying to get to Bran, trying to finish what had to be done. But she was too far, and time had run out. The Night King stepped into the godswood, calm and deliberate, his blue eyes fixed on Bran. Theon screamed as he charged, desperate, suicidal. His spear found nothing but air. In a single movement, the Night King pierced Theon's heart, letting him drop to the snow like an empty sack. Bran still did not move. His spirit was elsewhere, lost in time, watching a future that would never come to pass. There was no resistance. The Night King approached, raised his blade, and drove it through Bran Stark's chest. And in that instant, the world broke. A violent pulse rippled through the weirwood tree, shaking its crimson leaves. A sharp screech echoed into the skies, as if something ancient had been torn from the world. Bran's eyes blinked back into clarity, just for a second before. The life faded from them. His last breath escaped as a whisper, unheard by anyone. Jon Snow felt it. Far across the courtyard, locked in combat with a White Walker, he stumbled back, clutching his chest as if something inside him had died. Daenerys, circling above on Drogon, looked down and saw the dead begin to move faster, smarter. Less wild, more purposeful. Something had changed. Bran's death didn't stop the Night King. It empowered him. The living didn't know it yet, but the three-eyed raven had been more than a memory keeper. He was a tether, a balance, a curse holding the night. King in check. And now that curse was gone. The moment the blade left Bran's body, the Night King tilted his head and smiled. In the crypts, the dead rose more violently. In the halls, whites stopped aimlessly clawing and began to coordinate. They moved like soldiers, like they had command, as if a hive mind had found its queen, or in this case, its king. Arya burst into the godswood just in time to see Bran's lifeless body slumped against the roots. The Night King turned to her slowly, almost curiously, as if daring her to try. Her hand trembled as she reached for the dagger, but she didn't move fast enough. He raised his hand and she flew backward, thrown by invisible force into the tree behind her. She coughed blood, dazed and broken, her weapon lost in the snow. The Night King walked away. He didn't need to kill Arya. She wasn't the threat anymore. None of them were. Bran Stark was dead, and with him, so was the last hope the living had. Didn't even know it at first. Jon Snow was still fighting like the world depended on him, because it did. Dragonglass shattered through whites, his sword glowing with heat and blood and pain. But something felt wrong. The air had shifted. The enemy wasn't just pressing, they were calculating, hunting. Coordinated. Ghost howled from behind a pile of burning corpses, suddenly retreating instead of charging. Jon turned to regroup with his men, but there were fewer and fewer around. No one was holding the flank anymore. Davos had vanished. Tormund was bleeding from the face and barely standing. Sam was screaming somewhere nearby, surrounded. And then Jon saw it. From across the battlefield, The Night King walked out of the Godswood alive, untouched and confident. But where was Bran? Where was Arya? Where was Theon? Jon's heart skipped. He ran. He didn't even speak, just ran behind him. The battlefield was crumbling. Whites were no longer mindless. They were organized, overwhelming defenses in packs, cutting off escape routes, surrounding archers, dragging down giants with tactics. Something had changed, and it was terrifying. In the Godswood, the snow had turned red. Bran's body leaned lifelessly against the tree, eyes half open, chest still. Arya knelt beside him, broken and sobbing, the dagger useless beside her. Her face was smeared with blood, some of it hers, most of it his. When Jon arrived, he didn't ask. He didn't speak. He just stared. No, he whispered, collapsing to his knees beside his brother. No, no, no. Arya didn't look at him. Her voice cracked like old wood. He killed him. And the Night King? He didn't die. He just walked away. Jon reached for Bran's hand. It was cold. Something in him broke. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just stared into his brother's face and turned toward the battlefield. We're losing, Arya said bitterly. And he's not stopping. Jon stood, slowly, hollow. And we don't stop either. Arya shook her head. You don't understand, Jon. Bran wasn't just a Stark. He was the three-eyed raven. He kept it all together. The Night King was afraid of him. That's why he came here himself. That's why he killed him first. Jon clenched his fists. Then we kill the Night King. But Arya was silent. She didn't believe they could. Not anymore. In the sky, Rhaegal and Drogon roared, but the flames were fading. The dragons were tired, wounded, and now even fire didn't seem enough. Jon helped Arya up, limping, wounded. They picked up Bran's body together, carrying it out of the Godswood like a last sacred piece of the world. Winterfell was falling. Inside the castle walls, Sansa stood in the great hall, handing out weapons to children, to cooks, to anyone. Who could still stand? Gilly cried in the corner, clutching little Sam, trying to keep him quiet as the ground shook under their feet. Tyrion and Varys exchanged grim looks from the crypts. What if it's over? Varys whispered. Tyrion downed his wine in a single gulp. Then we drink while we wait. Outside, Daenerys hovered above the battlefield on Drogon, searching desperately for the Night King. She spotted him, finally walking calmly through. A field of fire, untouched. He looked up at her, eyes like ice. And he smiled. She commanded Drogon to burn him again. The firestorm lit the entire yard. But when it faded, he was still there, still smiling. And then he raised his hands. Again. And the dead rose faster, fiercer. This time, they weren't shambling. They were sprinting. And among them, rose Theon Greyjoy. Face pale, eyes dead, but body whole. The dead had a new purpose now, and the first thing they did was turn back toward Winterfell, the gates to finish what they started. The gates of Winterfell splintered before anyone even gave the order to retreat. The dead moved too fast, too precise. They didn't claw at the walls randomly anymore. They struck at weaknesses, bottlenecks, soft spots. It was like a general had taken control of chaos and shaped it into a machine. And the machine was hungry. Arya and Jon barely made it back through the great hall before the first wave hit the courtyard. They dropped Bran's lifeless body near the hearth, and Arya stood over him like she could still protect him somehow. Jon didn't argue. He didn't speak. He just turned, sword in hand, and faced the door. Ready to die. Grey Worm was already there, his armor cracked, eyes bloodied, but still standing. We hold here, he said through clenched teeth. We can't, Jon growled. We're not fighting lights. We're fighting a mind. And that mind is winning. Outside, Rhaegal crashed into the walls, his wing torn to shreds by a pack of undead leapers that had coordinated to bring him down. His screech echoed through the keep as he thrashed and burned everything around him, but it was a death song, not a battle cry. Drogon still circled above, but now wounded, barely able to hover. Daenerys clung to his back, her silver hair drenched. In blood not hers, and her face filled with rage. She'd never lost before. Not like this. Not while trying. Below, Davos was pulling the wounded into side halls, dragging children behind overturned tables, using his own body as a shield. Inside the crypts, the whispers had stopped. Now there were only screams, the dead inside the walls. Had awakened, Sansa screamed as the statue of Lyanna Stark cracked and toppled forward. From beneath it, a bony, half-decayed woman in a wedding gown lunged forward, her eyes glowing blue. Tyrion shoved Sansa behind him and drove a dragonglass blade through its throat. The white shrieked, then fell twitching at his feet. Tell me again why we thought hiding with the dead was a good idea? Tyrion snapped. Varys didn't answer. He was shaking, holding a dagger with two hands like it might turn on him. We die here, he muttered. We all die here. Here. Upstairs, Arya finally turned away from Bran. Her jaw clenched. She had failed. She was supposed to be the one to end it. That dagger catspaw had been meant for this. She had trained her whole life for one moment, one chance. And she missed it. She was too late. Jon noticed the change in her eyes. You're going after him, he said. Arya nodded. If I can get close again. He won't let you. Then we'll make him. She looked down at Bran one last time, brushing a hand. Over his face, now pale and stiff. He died because we weren't fast enough. No, Jon said, his voice low. He died because he was the only one the Night King feared. And now the fear is gone. They both stood, bruised and bloodied, as the doors to the great hall began to shake from the other side. The dead were coming through Dot and leading them. Was Theon Dot not Theon Greyjoy anymore? Not even Reek. Something worse. A white, yes, but not like the others. His body was intact, his eyes still blue, but he moved with memory, with purpose. As if Bran's final death hadn't just created another corpse. It had opened a door. The Night King had stolen something from Bran, and he had put it inside Theon Jon raised Longclaw. Arya gripped the catspaw, dagger tight. The dead burst through the doors like a wave of icy vengeance, and the last battle for Winterfell began, not for land, not for honor, but for the very soul of the living. The walls of the great hall cracked under the pressure. Wooden beams groaned. The sound of splintering echoed like thunder as the whites poured in silent, fast, and surgical. Not flailing, not roaring. Silent. That was what made them terrifying now. Jon Snow moved first. He dove into the wave with Longclaw, cutting through. The first line, slicing into necks and skulls, but for every one that fell, two more filled the space. Grey Worm fought beside him, dragging himself across the floor with a broken leg, but still stabbing with relentless precision. Arya vanished into the shadows, leaping between columns, cutting throats, disappearing before they hit the ground Dot, and then came him. Theon stepped through the wreckage of the door with the calm of someone who didn't need to rush. He wasn't twitching or stumbling like a white. He walked tall, upright, dragging the same spear he had once used to defend Bran. His eyes glowed cold. His mouth didn't open, but somehow Jon could feel words in his mind. You failed him. Jon didn't. Flinch. You're not Theon. The thing wearing Theon's face tilted its head. Aren't I? He died protecting Bran Stark. I remember it. I felt it. And now I carry what's left. Jon gritted his teeth. "You're just another corpse." Theon lunged. They collided in the middle of the room like thunder meeting steel. Jon ducked the first strike, countered with a clean slash that tore through Theon's chest. But the dead man didn't even react. He kept moving like he couldn't feel pain anymore. Because he couldn't. Meanwhile, Arya moved through the chaos, hunting for the Night King. She had seen him again briefly on the wall, watching from above like a god admiring his destruction. She knew she wouldn't get a second chance. But this time, she wasn't aiming to sneak. This time, she wanted him to see her coming. Down below, Drogon crash-landed in the yard, his wings shredded, his sides bleeding thick black blood. Daenerys tumbled from his back and screamed, but not from pain, from fury. Jorah had died trying to protect her. Missandei had already fallen in the first wave. Rhaegal was dead. The North had turned into a slaughterhouse. And now, she saw what Jon saw the Night King was winning. No, not just winning. He was conquering. Sansa stood behind the columns, clutching a dagger she didn't know how to use. Her gown was torn, her hair matted with ash. She watched as Tyrion tried to pull Gilly out of the fire, his own shoulder slashed open, limping with every step. Everything was falling apart. And above them, on the battlements of Winterfell, the Night King watched with quiet satisfaction. His hand raised again, and this time, something deeper happened. Not just more corpses, something older. From the cracks in the ice, the roots of the weirwood tree began to bleed. Not sap, not snow melt. Blood. And the Night King smiled, because Bran wasn't just dead. Bran was unraveling. The threads of the past, of every memory, ever stored in the three-eyed raven, were now slipping into the Night King's grasp. He wasn't just an army of death anymore. He was becoming history itself. And if he controlled the past, he would own the future. Arya Stark ran like a shadow between shadows. The halls of Winterfell were no longer safe. They were mazes of death, crawling with whites that didn't chase her, didn't scream, didn't falter. They moved as one, like wolves in a pack, and they knew she was coming. It was as if someone whispered her every step into their ears. She kept low, blade in hand, slipping through crumbled stairwells and blood-slick corridors. She remembered this castle from her childhood. It used to be home. Now it was a tomb, and at the top of it stood death itself. She saw him at last. The Night King stood alone on the highest battlement, staring into the storm. Snow swirled around him, yet not a flake touched his body. Time itself seemed to bend in his presence. She could feel it in her chest, the weight of all things past and future, pressing down on the now. This time, she wouldn't miss. Down below, the fight dragged on like a nightmare that refused to. Jon and the white that wore Theon's body clashed again, and again, neither yielding. Jon had landed 3 killing blows already, neck, chest, thigh, but the creature didn't stop. It didn't bleed. It barely reacted. "You don't belong here," Jon growled. The thing smiled, its eyes a deep, unnatural blue. Neither did he. Jon lunged, screaming, this time burying Longclaw into the white's gut and dragging it upward. The creature let out a sharp noise, not pain, not rage. Recognition. Like it remembered the sensation of dying. And then, finally, it collapsed. Jon turned to the others. The great hall was half on fire now. Grey Worm was on his knees, breathing, but unconscious. Gendry was fighting beside Davos, both of them barely able to stand. The children were gone, some dead, some hidden. Sansa stood in a corner, blood on her face, her dress ripped to ribbons. And behind her, Tyrion had taken a hit to the head, crawling toward her like a dying man grasping for light. "We have to leave the hall," Jon shouted, but no one could hear him over the roar of collapsing beams. A massive blast of cold air tore the northern wall open. The Night King's power pulsed through the stone. And with it came them. More whites, more White Walkers. But not just that old kings. Whites in old armor. Stark ancestors. Northern warriors long buried beneath the crypts. The Night King had raised not just the recent dead. He had taken Winterfell's roots. Arya reached the top, out of breath, her face smeared with soot and blood. The Night King turned toward her slowly. He didn't seem surprised. In fact, he looked inviting. Come to finish what you couldn't? He seemed to say without words. Arya didn't speak. She darted forward with the dagger, leaping like a ghost, the same move she used at the Godswood. The dagger was aimed for his chest. This time, he caught her mid-air. He gripped her by the throat, lifting her with inhuman strength. Her feet kicked in the air, the dagger falling from her fingers and clattering across the stone. And then he looked into her eyes, and something awful happened. Arya felt time itself freeze. She saw flashes of things that weren't hers memories. Visions, ghosts. She saw her father die again. Her mother scream at the Red Wedding. She saw herself in Braavos, blind and starving. She saw Nymeria walking alone in the woods. And beyond that, she saw Bran, but not how she remembered him. She saw him inside the night, king screaming fighting but bound. Some part of Bran Stark hadn't died in the God's Wood, it had been taken. Arya couldn't breathe. Not because the Night King's grip was tight, though it was, but because of what she saw inside his eyes. It wasn't just death. It wasn't just cold. It was memory. Thousands of voices swirled in the black between. His pupils, stories, faces. Bran's voice among them, faint and fractured, like it had been scattered into shards and thrown into an endless void. She saw glimpses of history, not as tales, but as wounds. The burning of Harrenhal, the children of the forest stabbing the first man, the long night, Ned Stark's execution, a mad king whispering, burned them all. And then, Bran again, inside a storm. He looked at her, not with fear, but with warning. And just like that, the Night King threw her aside. She hit the stone hard, coughing, dazed. The dagger lay just beyond her reach, glowing faintly with whatever power it held, but it meant nothing now. If Bran wasn't truly dead, if he was part of the Night King, then killing the Night King might kill him too. Or worse, release him into something darker. Down below, the last defenders of Winterfell were falling. Jon Snow had pulled Sansa and Tyrion into a back chamber with Davos and the few remaining soldiers. Daenerys stood outside, burning as many whites as Drogon could. Still handled before the dragon collapsed beneath the weight of the dead. Drogon was dying, everyone knew it, but he fought like he wanted to take the world with him. Grey Worm regained consciousness only long enough to hurl one last spear through the chest of a White Walker before he collapsed again, whispering something in Valyrian that no one understood. And then the skies cracked, a thunderclap louder than anything they'd heard before. But it wasn't thunder. It was the tree. The weirwood in the Godswood screamed, not in sound, but in essence. It twisted, rotted, and turned black as something unnatural began to erupt from its roots. The ground split. The air shimmered. And then he stepped through the storm. The Night King descended from the battlement, dragging behind him a shadow made of memories. Not just the dead, but moments, echoes, whispers of everything that once was. He wasn't just trying to win war. He was rewriting history. Inside the keep, Tyrion stood trembling. "We lost," he muttered. "We thought killing him would stop the dead, but killing Bran only freed something worse." Sansa looked at Jon, who had gone eerily still. "What is he doing? Why isn't he killing us all right now?" Jon didn't answer, because deep down, he knew. The Night King didn't want their deaths. Not yet. He wanted their memory, their stories, He wanted the last flames of the living to watch what the world used to be before he erased it completely. Arya crawled toward the dagger, each breath harder than the last. The Night King wasn't chasing her. He didn't need to. He'd already won. He'd pierced the heart of the realm, not with a blade, but with a theft. He had taken Bran, not just the boy, the history, the soul of Westeros, and now he would become the only story left. Arya's fingers closed around the catspaw dagger, but she hesitated. For the first time in her life, she doubted the kill. Would stabbing him kill Bran too? Or worse, release the power of the three-eyed raven into something no one could control? And yet, if she did nothing, the world would vanish. Slowly, memory by memory, light by light, she stared down at the dagger, and then a voice clear, broken, but unmistakable whispered inside her ear. It was Bran, not from the past, but from within. There's one place he can't follow. There's one place he can't follow. The whisper chilled Arya's spine. It wasn't echoing from around her. It was inside her skull, behind her heartbeat, pulsing with the weight of everything Bran had seen, everything he had become. The Night King had taken his body, maybe even most of his mind, but not everything. Arya blinked through the blur of blood and tears. Her fingers tightened around the catspaw dagger. She forced herself to stand out below. Winterfell was no longer Winterfell. The courtyard was a frozen graveyard, lit only by dying fires. The walls crawled with whites. The air shimmered with magic, so old it didn't even have a name. Drogon lay twitching, finally still. Daenerys knelt beside him, bloodied and broken. Not defeated, just done. Inside the keep, Jon stared out the shattered window, watching as the Night King approached, walking straight through the main gate, untouched, unchallenged. Whites stepped aside for him like servants. He held no weapon. He was the weapon. He was walking toward them. Tyrion was trying to light more dragonglass on fire, hands trembling. "There's nothing left," he muttered. "Even fire can't stop what's coming now. This isn't about killing anymore. This is annihilation." Sansa sat on the floor beside a dying Gilly, stroking her hair, humming the same lullaby Catelyn once sang when Arya and Robb were children. Jon didn't move, not until Arya appeared at the hall's entrance. She was limping, face pale, her voice hoarse. "He has Bran," she said, "but not all of him." Jon turned toward her. "What do you mean?" "He's trying to erase the world. Not just people, stories. That's why he took Bran. He wants to be the only memory that remains." "And Bran? He's still in there. Barely. But he showed me something. A place in time. A memory even the Night King can't reach." Jon's face hardened. "What memory?" Arya's lips tightened. "The moment the Night King was made. The day the children of the forest stabbed a man with dragonglass and cursed the world." Silence fell like snow. "That's impossible," Tyrion whispered. "You'd have to go back thousands of years." "There's no way." "There is," Arya interrupted. "Through Bran. Through what's left of him." Jon finally stepped forward. "You're saying we don't kill the Night King now?" "I'm saying we go before the Night King ever was." The moment Arya said it, everything around them trembled. The walls groaned. The flames flickered. And from outside, the Night King paused. He knew. He felt it. Bran wasn't just hiding. Bran was resisting. But time was fragile. And the memory that held that secret, the origin of the Night King, was buried in Bran's deepest self, like a last locked door. And only one person could reach it. Arya. She looked at the dagger again. Its blade shimmered, not with heat, but with memory. It had once been meant to kill Bran. Now it would save him. She gritted her teeth. "I need time. Hold him off." Jon nodded. But he didn't smile. He knew what it meant. Arya pressed the dagger to her heart, just enough to cut, just enough to bleed. The blood dropped onto the stone floor, and the world fell away. Inside her mind, she was no longer in Winterfell. She stood in a forest of green flame and weeping trees. Faces blinked from the bark. Whispers filled the air. She heard voices not, just Bran's, her mother, her father, Jojen, Hodor, all the dead who had touched the raven's gift. And there, in the center of it all, chained to the roots of the first tree, was Bran. Young, scared, but alive. He looked up. "I'm losing," he said. "Not yet," Arya replied, moving toward him. "You said there's a place he can't reach." Bran nodded toward a pulsing tear in the air behind him. "The beginning. The day Leaf created him. But it's not just a memory. It's a wound. You go in, you don't come out the same. Or maybe not at all." Arya clenched her fists. "I've walked through worse." Bran reached for her hand. "You walk into that past, you might kill the Night King before he exists. But you might not come back." Arya didn't flinch. "I've never planned to come back. Arya walked into the wound in the air, like stepping through a screen made solid. The forest vanished. The voices stopped. There was no time, no light. Just becoming. And then she was there. Thousands of years in the past, standing at the edge of a quiet grove under the watchful gaze of the first tree. Its white bark was untouched, its red leaves still vibrant. The world felt innocent. But it not for long. She saw them, the children of the forest, small, sharp-eyed beings with bark-like skin, surrounding a man bound to a stone slab. He thrashed and cursed in the old tongue. His eyes were wild. His hands clenched fists. Of dirt. The man who had become the Night King, Arya, stayed hidden in the shadows, watching, waiting. They raised the dragonglass. Bran's voice whispered in her mind. They didn't mean to create him. They meant to protect themselves. But pain doesn't listen. Once you bury it in someone, it grows. Arya's heart pounded. Her fingers wrapped around the cat's paw dagger. She knew the truth now. Killing the man before he became the Night King would stop it all. But it would also erase Bran's power. No three-eyed raven. No long memory. The past itself would rethread. Westeros would be reborn different, but maybe free. She stepped forward. The children of the forest didn't see her. The dragonglass was inches from the man's chest. Arya took aim, but just as she moved, he turned. The man on the stone looked straight at her. And he smiled. It wasn't the Night King yet, but something in his eyes already knew. She lunged and drove the dagger into his heart. There was a sound like stone shattering. Across a mountaintop, then light, then nothing. Winterfell. The storm stopped. Mid-sky. Snow froze, hanging like dust in the air. The whites all stopped moving at once, like their strings had been cut. They collapsed, not in agony, but in peace. Silent, weightless deaths. The Night King stumbled. For the first time ever. He looked afraid, and then he cracked. From the heart outward. His skin split like ice over fire. His eyes shattered. And then he exploded into ash. The dead dropped. And silence fell. Jon Snow blinked, sword still raised, as the last White Walker turned to powder in front of him. Grey Worm, bloodied and breathless, looked around in disbelief. Sansa collapsed into Tyrion's arms, too shocked to cry. And Bran, his body still cold in the hall, gasped. His eyes shot open. But they weren't the same. He sat upright, blinking like a man waking from a 1,000-year dream. She did it. He whispered. Arya stood alone in the grove. The past was gone. The children were gone. Even the man she had killed, he had never become. The world had changed, and she wasn't part of it anymore. She looked down at her hands. They were fading, like a memory no longer needed. And for the first time in her life, she smiled. Not for revenge, not for death, but because she chose the end. In Winterfell, the snow began to fall again, but this time gently. Bran sat beneath the weirwood tree, once more whole, quiet. The history of the world had shifted. He remembered it all. 2 timelines, 1 sacrifice. And he remembered her. Jon stood beside him. Where is she? Bran looked toward the rising sun. She's everywhere,